Hey everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic back once again because the PWI 500 for 2022 has just dropped, everyone. Calm down, stop arguing immediately. Yeah, when I was looking on Twitter, there was a lot of arguments popping off, even before the 500 had dropped. Well, the top 10 of the 500, of course. And as we've done in previous years, I'm here to give a rundown of that top 10 and give my initial thoughts on this, maybe spark some debate in the comments. Nice debate. And also to maybe say where I would have put someone higher or lower even. So, we'll see how that goes. Now remember, of course, that this is not for the year of 2022, but for PW Insider's pre-established evaluation period, which runs from July 1st, 2021 all the way around to June 30th, 2022. So we're looking at last summer to this summer, not January to now. And also remember that it's a mix of like shoot and kayfabe evaluations. So we're not just taking into account how well somebody did in the ring over the course of the year. It's not like the Wrestling Observer Awards. We're also going to factor in things like title wins and status and how prominent somebody is in the wrestling landscape. They're also quite important as well. In fact, I'd suggest that this year, the wrestling landscape thing is more important than ever. There seems to have been quite a lot of emphasis on that. I will read now, and Sam will hopefully flash it up on screen. I'll read the evaluation criteria that PWI put out themselves. So we've got in-ring achievement, that's more kayfabe kind of stuff. We've got influence, again, that could be a mix of shoot and kayfabe, I suppose. Very important this year. Keep that influence one in mind. We've got technical ability, that's more of a shoot one, which they've relied on less in previous years, but maybe have a bit more this time. And also competition, because you can be the champion of your local indie fed for like 5 million days, but it's not going to compare to someone who's a WWE champion, for example. Also remember that this is male singles wrestlers only. PWI also releases a women's list and a tag team list, just in case you're wondering why the likes of Dax Harwood or Utami Hayashishita from Stardom aren't involved here. It's male singles wrestlers only. And one last rule as well before we crack on with number 10, it's wrestlers who have to have wrestled a minimum of 10 matches or 6 matches in separate months spread out across the evaluation period. Crucially, that means no Brock Lesnar. He hasn't wrestled enough. So number 10 is none other than former Ring of Honor World Champion and former Progress Champion, Jonathan Gresham. This one's going to cause a lot of laughs in the wrestling community, especially on Twitter, because of those reports that Gresham cited his prior PWI placings to Tony Khan when he was talking to him about getting signed with AEW and all sorts of things. I don't know how true that necessarily is, but what I will say is, Gresham, do it again, mate, because you're in the top 10 this year. Congratulations. He's not going to like that. He's not going to like that at all. He's not going to watch this video. He started the evaluation period as Ring of Honor Pure Champion, defended it here and there in a few Pure Rules matches, then defeated Brody King to earn a Ring of Honor World title shot. He had that title shot at Final Battle 2021, where he defeated Jay Lethal to become Ring of Honor World Champion, unifying it with that Pure Wrestling title. It's a strong start to the evaluation period, Jonathan. Good stuff. Now then you might be thinking, hang on, then Ring of Honor kind of stopped for a while, didn't it? Until the company was bought out by Tony Khan. But Ring of Honor might have stopped. Jonathan Gresham did not. He defended that Ring of Honor World title in all kinds of different promotions, from GCW to Progress. He was defending it all over the place and against a variety of opponents as well, even in Impact Wrestling. And even if we put aside the fact that he was Ring of Honor World Champion, Gresham still had a very strong year by anybody's standards, winning the WXW 16-carat gold tournament in Germany and also becoming Progress World Champion, defeating Cara Noir, although he kind of had to vacate that belt a bit later on. It all got a bit messy, but he was at one point a double world champion. He also beat Bandido at the Ring of Honor show at WrestleMania weekend to keep a hold of that Ring of Honor World title, and then lost it to Claudio Castagnoli and then really suffered a massive drop-off. But fortunately for Gresham, that all came after the end of the evaluation period. But what does this mean for his number 10 placing? Honestly, right, and this might be controversial, let me know if you agree in the comments down below, I think Gresham deserves to be higher. Quite a lot higher, maybe even top 5 if that doesn't sound too crazy. I know he didn't hold a major title in WWE or AEW, but he did keep that Ring of Honor World title prestigious, keep it afloat, while the company itself didn't even exist for a while. I think you've got to commend him for that. Big tournament win in Europe, big Progress World title win, and the drop-off came after the end of the evaluation period. I think Gresham has a legitimate top 5 case here, and could really be hard done by just down in number 10. Number 9, former WWE champion and somebody we all very much miss on our screens, Big E. He, of course, started this evaluation period last summer by winning the Money in the Bank ladder match before cashing in on Bobby Lashley on Raw for a big feel-good babyface moment. Big E had finally done it. He'd finally won the world title. You might think it's a bit of a cheap way for him to win, though, cashing in on Lashley, a weakened Bobby Lashley at that. But then he did have a rematch with him in a steel cage, and then a bruising no contest afterwards. So I think he did really sort of galvanize his reign early on. He also beat Drew McIntyre clean as a whistle at Crown Jewel 2021, a huge win in anybody's book, even if Drew wasn't quite as high up the card as he would be in recent months. But it was still Drew McIntyre. It's still a big victory. Big E did then go on to lose to Roman Reigns at Survivor Series in the annual champion versus champion co-brand main event. But honestly, everyone loses to Roman, so what can you say? There was another defense on Raw against Austin Theory, and then Big E eventually lost that title in the big multi-man match at Day 1, where Brock Lesnar beat up everybody and walked out with the belt. Then, obviously, shortly after that, Big E unfortunately got injured quite seriously, and we haven't seen him wrestle since. All the best to his recovery, but he still cracks the PWI top 10. I'll be honest, when the list first dropped, I looked at Big E at number 9 and thought, does he deserve to be there? And then when I did my research, I thought, no, he almost certainly does. The reign was longer than I remembered it being and featured quite a lot of good stuff as well. Some really good matches in there for Big E. 9, you could maybe argue is a bit high, but I don't think that's Big E's fault himself. I think that's more on WWE for not presenting him as prominently as they should have as the champion of one of their brands and the holder of their most historic, prestigious title. So that's not really on Big E. And I think I'd be quite harsh saying he doesn't deserve to be in the top 10, so maybe 9's fair enough. Well done, Big E. Number 8, I'd say the most left field, the most obscure person in this top 10 as well. Number 8 is AAA's El Hijo del Vikingo, the current AAA mega champion. This was a bit of a curious one, and I'll explain why. At first, I was like, oh yeah, PWI have just included him because they want to look really clever, including a big champion from Mexico that few, maybe English-speaking wrestling fans had really considered. But I did my research, and that particular thought I had about PWI might not be too far from the truth. Now, you can't argue that Vikingo didn't have a brilliant start to the evaluation period. He won not only the AAA Mega Championship, but also won the Crashers main championship as well, defeating Bandido for that. So he already held 2 major titles in 2 major Mexican promotions. He defended both for a while, mainly the AAA one against the likes of Flamita and Laredo Kid, but also the Crash one occasionally, but then he had to vacate the Crash one because of an injury in March 2022. Now, I at first thought, was there a bit of politicking there? Because even if he did get injured, he wasn't out for long at all. Surely not long enough to have to vacate the Crashers title. He was back wrestling very soon after that injury against the Young Bucks of all people in tag team action, where I'm assuming you have to be able to move okay in the ring to keep up. But then I looked a bit closer, and ever since a title defense in February against John Morrison, or John Superstar as he went by at that event, Vikingo hasn't defended the title at all and has only appeared in multi-man matches. So he vacated the Crashers title because of injury, kept a hold of the AAA title, but didn't defend it since February, before the injury. And since then, he's not wrestled a single singles match. So I don't know what's going on there. If anybody understands the lucha scene more than I do, please leave an explanation in the comment section down below. Is he still working with an injury? What's going on there? And honestly, because of this, and partly down to my own ignorance, unfortunately, but he hasn't defended the title for months and months and months. I have to say that maybe Vikingo doesn't even deserve to be at number 8. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be in the top 10. Yes, winning 2 major Mexican world titles simultaneously is very, very impressive indeed. I'm not turning my nose up at that. But neither reign has been particularly impressive or impactful in the wrestling landscape at all. So, yeah, I don't really know what's going on. Once again, if you understand, please do pop an explanation down below. Number 7, it's the Dragon himself. That was really overdramatic. It's Bryan Danielson. Bryan started the evaluation period by obviously rocking up in AEW, a seismic turn of events in the pro wrestling world, and then wrestling Kenny Omega to an outstanding 30-minute time limit draw on AEW television. He then entered the number one contender tournament, defeating Dustin Rhodes, Eddie Kingston and Miro in the final to earn that title shot against Hangman Page, and what followed was nothing short of spectacular. That's because Bryan, of course, went to a 60-minute time limit draw with Hangman Page at Winter is Coming before losing a rematch in a match just short of half an hour, another excellent bout as well. Bryan clearly had not missed a step in the break between leaving WWE and heading to AEW. He was really on fire. But crucially, for the purposes of this list, he wasn't really winning much. He would win against lesser people on the card, in the pecking order of course, but didn't win any major matches. In fact, he then lost to Jon Moxley, and that's when Regal got involved, and since then, Bryan's been in sort of tag team action here and there with other members of the Blackpool Combat Club. All really stellar stuff, of course, as you expect from Danielson when he enters the ring. But in terms of the kayfabe aspect of the PWI 500, does that mean he deserves to be at number 7? This one's really tricky, because you have to weigh up how much of PWI's categories matter versus any other. In previous years, they seem to really hammer home kayfabe achievements over shoot ability in the ring. This time, they might have tried to even that up slightly, so I'm a little bit confused. Because yes, in terms of shootability in the ring, Bryan 100% deserves to be in the top 10 of the PWI 500. Of course he does. I don't think anybody could argue against that. In terms of kayfabe achievements, I'm not so certain. He hasn't really won anything at the time of recording. Obviously, he could go on to become AEW World Champion, the next World Champion, or he could not. We'll have to wait and find that out. Regardless, it'll come after the evaluation period. So for that reason, you could maybe split the difference and say he does deserve his placing in the top 10, but just because I don't want to weigh kayfabe achievements so far below shoot ability in the ring, because that's what sets the PWI 500 apart after all, I'd maybe say he should be a place or two lower down, maybe 9th or 10th or something, but the more I say that, the more ludicrous it sounds, because it's Bryan Danielson. Number 6, another wrestler where the same kind of argument or debate applies in my opinion, and that is Cody Rhodes. Now this is where the evaluation period really comes into its own, because it reminds us of stuff that happened what feels like several lifetimes ago after all the wrestling news that's happened in the months since. But we're going back to Cody's feud, his ill-fated feud with Malachi Black, to start the explanation of his placing here. That feud with Malachi Black was the one where we were begging Cody to turn heel, and he didn't. Then he had that feud with Andrade, where he put himself through fire for us, and we still begged him to turn heel. Then he won the TNT title against Sammy Guevara, and we all went, don't know about that decision. But then, on the positive side, he lost it back to him in that excellent ladder match, so that was all good. Then he left AEW, and we all went, hang on. That was obviously really shocking. What was less shocking, because I think most of us had guessed it by this point, was when he rocked up in WWE and faced Seth Rollins in a barn burner of a match, one of the biggest wrestling moments on screen at least of 2022. That obviously led to this trilogy of matches with Rollins, with Cody getting the dub in all 3 of them. The most noteworthy, I think, probably being that 5-star Hell in a Cell match against Rollins, where Cody wrestled with a torn pec, visible bruising all over the place. A really unique match, a really grim and grisly one, but compelling viewing nonetheless. Before his injury, I think Cody probably was slated, as many of us predicted, to win the Money in the Bank ladder match, which Theory ended up winning, or at least the Royal Rumble, which he could still do in 2023. Again, this is similar to Bryan Danielson, because much of what Cody did in the ring this year was electrifying. Like Bryan, he jumped from one major company to another. That was a huge moment in the wrestling landscape. All the in-ring stuff was largely great, but he didn't really win much of consequence. I guess you could say he did win a bit more than Bryan did. He did win the TNT title, for example. He did position himself to become maybe WWE champion later on as well. But Cody's case for me is very similar to Bryan's, maybe even a smidge weaker if you consider the in-ring action to be more important, because I think Bryan's had an absolutely stellar year. Cody's had a great year as well. Maybe in terms of kayfabe success, he's higher than Bryan, but ultimately I would have to rate them at a similar sort of level in this top 10 if it was my own decision. Maybe we're looking at somewhere in, 10 to 5 rather than as high as, well, 6 is in 10 to 5, Jack, so get your maths right, you fool. What I will say about Cody, and this applies to Bryan Danielson as well, keep an eye on where they land in next year's PWI 500, because we could be seeing them a lot higher than 7th and 6th. Number 5, another former WWE champion before those belts were merged, Bobby Lashley. He started this period as WWE champion, in fact, a really dominant presented WWE champion, beating the likes of Kofi Kingston, Xavier Woods, and even Goldberg at SummerSlam. As I say, at the start of the evaluation period, we're coming off Lashley's really successful previous year when he finished third, I believe, in last year's PWI 500. This time around, there was a dip. Big E cashed in the Money in the Bank contract. Lashley lost the rematch against Goldberg at Crown Jewel and generally suffered, a little bit of a reversal in fortune, although he was back to winning ways pretty shortly. He was always kind of shown on screen as being in the mix for the world title again, like he was in that multi-man match at day one when Lesnar won the belt. He was in the Elimination Chamber, but again, he didn't manage to win. But he was always at or near the top of the card. Then he dropped again, down into kind of the mid-card with that iffy feud with Omos, then up a little bit again because he beat Austin Theory for the US Championship, but that came after the end of the evaluation period. So even though now we think of Bobby Lashley as this amazing US champion, we can't take that into account here. I love the way that Bobby has been presented on TV recently and also last year, but the gap in between, I think, largely falls within this evaluation period. And for that reason, I think his placing on the list here, even though fifth's, good, I think it's a bit too high. I mean, it's worth remembering that he was third last year, and I think that was possibly a fair reflection, but on the other hand, fifth, I think now is too high. I think Bobby has suffered a dip, not his own fault, but just in terms of WWE's booking, he's suffered a dip. Remember that title reign in this year's evaluation period, the only big defense really, I guess, came against Goldberg, which is not exactly what you want to see your current up-to-date world champion doing. On the other hand, he's really good on screen and is arguably in the midst of a career peak. I just think the timing of the evaluation period from July 2021 till June 2022 really kind of screwed him over here. I'm not knocking him, but just in terms of what he's done this year, I'd maybe even put Gresham ahead of him, That's because I'm a big dirty smark, though. Number 4, yeehaw, saddle up, everybody. It's Hangman Adam Page. This is kind of the opposite of Bobby. Because my first instinct was, Bobby Lashley's high. Of course he is. He's so dominant and strong. But then I looked at what actually happened within the past 12 months and I thought, maybe not. Likewise, the current thought, I guess, of Hangman Adam Page is as somebody whose eventual world title reign fell a little bit flat. But then when I went back and looked at what he'd done, I was like, oh man, maybe it wasn't as weak as I thought. At the start of the evaluation period, Hangman was being set up to win that AEW World Championship from Kenny Omega at All Out, but then obviously took time off. I think because of the birth of his child. He came back anyway, got number 1 contendership in a ladder match, won at Full Gear in that big jubilant moment, defeating Kenny Omega finally. The culmination of probably the best long-term storyline, not only in AEW history, but in recent modern wrestling, I'd say as well. It was an unbelievable arc, and it all culminated at Full Gear. Then, I think people assumed the drop-off was instant, but I would disagree. I actually think that the title reign got off to a great start with that 1-hour time limit draw against Bryan Danielson at Winter is Coming, Jon Snow. And then the rematch where he beat him in a half-hour barn burner. So I think Hangman started off very strong. But sadly, this was one of those cases, ultimately, of the journey being better than the destination. Once your big babyface has gone through this thrilling chase of ups and downs, chasing that world title, once he's won it, well, the only way to take the audience there is down, unfortunately. Through no fault of Hangman's own, and I think those title defenses against the likes of Lance Archer and Adam Cole, there was nothing wrong with them, but through no fault of his own, they were kind of overshadowed by all the other stuff going on in AEW at the time, especially sort of like the MJF CM Punk feud, for example. Hangman ultimately, of course, lost that title to CM Punk, and then everything's kind of come crashing down since, on and off camera, although I'm still a big fan of his, and I'm pretty sure he'll come roaring back, right? At the same time, I think this might be unpopular. I think he deserves his spot here, number 4. I think he's had an amazing year. I think that the title reign falling flat's a slightly false narrative, because I think it got off to a really good start and then slowly petered out, maybe. But I think generally I've enjoyed more of what Hangman's done than I've disliked it. And I think 4th, I think it's probably deserved. Number 3, controversial one maybe, same as the Bryan placing, the Cody placing. Oh man. It's CM Punk. Now remember, I urge you, I stress that this all the stuff we take into account about CM Punk for this rating is before the press conference, before the brawl backstage, before all of this sensational newsing that's happened over the past few weeks. This all came after the evaluation period. We're just talking about what CM Punk did from when he started in AEW and came back to wrestling up until, I think, right around the time he beat Hangman for that title. And I mean, Punk had a stellar year up until that point. The return match against Darby Allin was excellent. The feud against Eddie Kingston was excellent. And best of all, I think, was the feud against MJF. That was superb as well. Then he won the title from Hangman Page, and then things went wrong. Obviously, he got injured, and then the evaluation period just kind of ends. So it's a hard one to gauge. This sounds stupid because I'm a huge CM Punk fan, and I would have him down as one of my wrestlers of the year probably for what he's done and all the feuds he's had. But in the PWI way of doing things, I'd have Hangman ahead of him. He had a long-ish reign as AEW World Champion. He had these long matches where he beat the likes of Bryan Danielson, Adam Cole, highly regarded wrestlers. CM Punk only won the title right at the end and then got injured. So even though all his work was stellar, I'm putting him in a similar category to Cody, to Bryan Danielson, people whose kayfabe achievements weren't really that good actually when you think about it, but whose in-ring shooty style achievements and the stories they told, they were really good. So I think Punk may be a tad high, but I also think he probably deserves to be at the forefront of that Punk, Bryan, Cody trilogy. I think that he possibly had the best year of the three. I feel controversial saying that, Crucially though, I would put him behind Hangman Page. I think Hangman had those bangers with the likes of Omega, with Danielson. That all came with the world title. I think Punk's best work came away from the world title, and while he had a great year, I think you've got to put Hangman ahead of him, especially because that big culmination of everything, the win over Kenny Omega, came within the evaluation period. Before we get to number 2, I should point out I am going to put forward some of my own suggestions of people that I think should maybe have been in the... I'll do that in a second. Number 2 is the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada. Okada started off the evaluation period strong, winning the G1 Climax, only I think losing one match in the process against Tama Tonga, but winning the overall tournament, beating Kota Ibushi in a shame of a final. It was a shame because that was where Ibushi injured his arm and the referee had to just wave it off, and it could have been such a fantastic match. It was on its way to being. Okada, of course, went on then to have a great Wrestle Kingdom, beating Shingo Takagi for the world title on night 1 and successfully defending it against Will Ospreay on night 2. And for fans of Big Dave Meltzer out there, that second match was 5 3/4 stars. That's a lot of snowflakes, man. It was a decent reign with the belt. Okada had some pretty good title defenses against Tetsuya Naito twice and one against Zack Sabre Jr., I believe, as well, before, of course, losing it to Jay White at Dominion, and Jay White now currently holds that belt. It was also nice and slightly surreal to see Okada pop up at Forbidden Door as well, which just creeped in before the end of PWI's evaluating period in that 4-way match alongside Adam Cole, Adam Page, and Jay White, who retained the belt. Okada's a tricky one to judge because we're comparing him not only against others in the PWI 500, but against his own usually insanely high standards. I think for anybody else, Okada's had a wonderful year, but weirdly, it might be looked back upon as like a below average year for Okada just because his usual average is so high. And also, the average quality of New Japan Pro Wrestling itself is usually so high, but I think unquestionably they have dipped a bit since the pandemic. I'd still have Okada top 5, definitely. I don't think number 2, but I have a candidate for number 2 who's not even in the top 10 at all. Let's talk about some who may have missed out, and I'll get to him at the end of this little segment. So yes, some possible omissions. I've got Konosuke Takeshita here, not just for his very successful AEW excursion, but for his DDT title reign, or the KOD title reign in DDT, where he beat the legendary Jun Akiyama to kickstart his 5th reign with that belt. So yeah, Takeshita's had a great year, and I think even though he's become more well-known to a lot of Western fans, I think the quality of that year may have even slipped slightly under the radar. Moose and Josh Alexander for their work as heel and babyface respectively at the top of Impact's card over the past year, that's been really good. Matt Cardona, who held the NWA title, the GCW title, yes, he's not putting on 5-star barn burners night after night, but Cardona knows how to sell a match and he knows how to spark a feud on social media. It's what he's excelled at, getting himself over on the internet for years now. He was like the pioneer of that, and I think this past year was a really successful one for him in that regard. Will Ospreay as well, possibly. I think maybe could have got on this top 10. Obviously, he lost his biggest match of the year against Okada at Wrestle Kingdom Night 2, but he's had several really good matches on top of that, and I think we're judging him like we do with Okada against his own lofty standards. But he held the Rev Pro title for quite a long time in the UK as well, only recently losing it. So I think Ospreay could have realistically cracked the top 10 too, but those are my names on here. The big one that I saw everybody talking about on Twitter was Jon Moxley. A lot of people saying he should have been number 1 even. And this is where I think the evaluation period trips a lot of people up. I love Jon Moxley. I nominated him in our half-year Culty Awards for Wrestler of the Year, although he lost the fan vote to Dax Harwood, fair enough. But now I think after the past month or two, people are starting to see Jon Moxley emerge as a genuine Wrestler of 2022 favourite. The evaluation period isn't kind to him. All the good stuff that Moxley's been doing, I think, largely came before and after the evaluation period. Kind of like Bobby Lashley, although he made his way onto this list, so I don't know why Moxley didn't. You could definitely say that Moxley deserves to be in the top 10 too, I suppose. The big one that I think, the person most hard done by in this year's PWI 500, without question to me, is Shingo Takagi. Shingo, for the first half of the evaluation period, was a really strong IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. He was having banger after banger, as I've said about many people on this list, but he especially was, against Ospreay, against Zack Sabre Jr., against Tomohiro Ishii on night 1 of the G1 Climax last year, which was an excellent match. Yeah, he was an excellent champion for pretty much half of the year. Shingo Takagi, I think, I'll let you in on a bit of a secret behind the curtain. I was doing a few notes to get the jump on this video before we saw what the top 10 was, and then I could maybe tweak those depending on... I had Shingo so high up. I had him so high up on this, and to see him not make the top 10 at all, it's a weird one. Before we get to number 1, I guess I'll give a bit of a rough top 10 of my own. I'd agree with the eventual winner, who we'll talk about in a second. I'd have Shingo second. I know that's a huge jump, but I'd have him second. Okada third, maybe Hangman fourth. Gresham has to be in the top 5, I'd say. Then in some order, I'd put maybe Punk, Bryan and Cody. Big E probably has to be in the mix as well. Around where he landed, I suppose. Maybe a Moxley or an Ospreay or even a Matt Cardona to round out the top 10. That's roughly what I would have done. But that winner that I agreed with, number 1 of this year's PWI 500, is Roman Reigns. What more can you say about Roman Reigns? He's beaten everyone. I'll run through them. He beat Edge at Money in the Bank, Cena at SummerSlam, Balor at Extreme Rules, the weird match with the music and the but then Roman still won anyway. Lesnar at Crown Jewel, Big E at Survivor Series in a non-title match. He lost via DQ to Seth Rollins at the Royal Rumble because Rollins got in his head with the Shield antics and everything, but Roman kept hold of the title. He then beat Goldberg at Elimination Chamber, Lesnar again at WrestleMania to unify the belts. He beat Riddle in that big pay-per-view level title match on SmackDown as well, and then he beat Lesnar a casual third time. Just beat Lesnar 3 times in 1 year, although the tractor match came after the end of the evaluation period. But I've just ran down the list of accolades there. Roman Reigns, I think, is the only choice here for number 1. And the ultimate reason for Roman being number 1 here isn't just for him being probably like the best or most prestigious heel in all of wrestling today. I think also Roman's opponents often use this line in storylines with him saying you're a part-time champion. Drew McIntyre did it very recently before losing to him at Clash at the Castle. Roman doesn't show up on TV all that often, but look at that pay-per-view resume I just read out, and the Riddle match on SmackDown as well. That's a bit of an odd one out. He turns up when it really, really matters. And in a world where AEW was signing Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, all these big candidates to boost the status of WWE's competition and raise the profile of its top title, Roman kept his title, and then the other one as well when he unified them. He kept those belts comfortably the most prestigious in all of the wrestling world, in my opinion. And I think for that reason, and many others, yeah, I agree with them placing him at number 1. I don't agree with many of the other placements in the PWI 500 top 10 this year, but I do agree with the big dog being top dog. So there we have it. That is the PWI 500 top 10 for 2022. What do you think? I'm sure you need no invite to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Twitter always blows up, doesn't it, when this happens, and I assume YouTube does as well. But I enjoyed making this video. Let me know if you enjoyed it too. Smash that like button and all that YouTubey stuff. And yeah, I'll see you very soon.